focused on the autism side of things. And so I thought to myself, about a month ago, I wrote about the transition from DSM-4 to DSM-5 and how it went, from Asperger's, because I can script and I can talk, to ASD, support needs 2, because I still do struggle mightily with language. And so from that standpoint, I thought about the naysayers and all the bother around behaviorism and how a lot of autistic spaces online, a lot of self-advocates, they are pushing to advocate that their governments ban, applied behavior analysis, ban ABA, hashtag ban ABA, all these kinds of stuff. And I don't want to upset too many people, but my opinion on that's a bit more nuanced. I've written several times and in several places about my own encounters with behaviorism and my own disdain for it. My own problems tend to be around language, that behaviorism treats language as behavior. And there are other parts of behaviorism that, families have told me that, yes, they don't like it, but in a certain aspect, it teaches children, not to be crude about it, but how not to get shot by American police. And so from the standpoint of banning it outright, I think in that kind of relational aspect, I've softened a bit from, kind of centering myself to listening to people and wanting to have conversations around things. So all of these things kind of coalesced over the last, 10 days or so in my mind of like, where can we really dive into this? Where can we make it not only meaningful and impactful, but interesting? And so I thought to myself, says I to me, an autism diagnosis, right? In DSM-5, the text revision, all of the different diagnostic criteria, they describe behaviors, right? What autistic people do and how that behavior impacts them relative to schools, economic activity, getting a job, and etc. It doesn't describe language. It does not describe how the brain works, right? It doesn't describe where this autism comes from. Gestalt processing, on the other side, describes a language architecture, right? An architecture of making meaning. And so Gestalt processing, in my view, is not just language. It's everything, whole to part. And so from that standpoint, I was looking this week at the diagnostic system as a whole to say it focuses on behaviors when it comes to autistic people. And many, many autistic people are Gestalt processors. I am. And I want to move away from a position previously held that I'm self-identified as a Gestalt processor to say that there is evidence in the diagnostic record to say that, yes, I am a Gestalt processor by the data gathered in relation to my autism diagnosis. And I know you might think that sounds a bit funny, but I think this system has been gathering this data all along. Just nobody's known where to look for it. And so on Monday, right, I'm recording this on Saturday, I'll release it tomorrow, Sunday, so it should be Sunday by the time you're seeing this. The following day, Monday, I start a new series of writings called Interior Architecture. And inside of that, I want to do something very specific. And I want to take these, again, diagnostics, right, describing behavior, and I want to show you where you can find the evidence of Gestalt processing, right? So we start off with the map and the territory. That's the very first piece. And this kind of introduces the premise. And then we move into the DSM itself and say, what are those things in the DSM, these observable communication patterns, right? Because remember that social communication, communication ability, repetitive behaviors, these types of things, they're part of the diagnostic criteria. And so when you read the DSM through a language architecture lens, those same descriptions, they look less like deficits and more like clues about how meaning forms in our gestalt-based systems. And so if you read the manual, the DSM as such, right, as a kind of a guide, I think there's a lot in there, right? So the so-called naysayers, looking for the evidence, I think the evidence is in there, right? When you talk about echolalia, right, it's described as repetition when it comes to the DSM, but in Gestalt systems, these repeated phrasings, they're stored with meaning. They carry context, they carry emotion, they carry memory as language develops, and the whole patterns move towards flexibility. So from that standpoint, if your diagnosis, mine does, includes this kind of repetitive speech pattern, otherwise known as echolalia, then we have a piece of evidence that we can say. We can say it's a trace, right? Using the forensic science term, it's a trace that something is there, and a lot of traces kind of add up to something, right? And so we move through the traces, echolalia not being repetition, and then that kind of literal thinking that autistic people are often accused of, right? We take idiom, we take, hold your horses as literal. Like, I don't have horses. What are you talking about horses, right? And I explain from a Gestalt standpoint how that literalness is simply an early stage of Gestalt systems still building its pattern network, right? It's missing the bridge between the lived experience of the idiom and, we default to the literal. We know what a horse is. We know what holding something is. And so in the absence of that bridging memory, that full gestalt of the idiom, the experience, we default to the literal. And it happens kind of naturally because, we want to exist in community. We want to exist conversationally. And so kind of step by step, right, I will break down over the next week or so, to kind of ask the question, like, where does my autism end and my Gestalt processing begin, right? And I'm not doing it kind of a poetic, lyrically, my usual shenanigans. I'm doing it from the DSM itself. And I'm doing it from the 100 years that we have of Gestalt psychology, language processing, going from Peters to Blanc, going all the way back, to Vygotsky and how meaning is made and so on. But then also going side by side with the DSM to say, it says this, right? And it's a device that I use in my class to help Gestalt people, Gestalt language processors, Gestalt thinkers to say, start building that practice of interpretation, right? And it's a device that I use. It says, I say, and so, right? It says on the page, thus and such. How do I reframe that? How do I reposition myself inside of that? How do I make meaning from that? And so as I'm using in the classroom, I might use the self-regulated strategy development saying, I really don't know what this means. I have no idea what they're on about. So my autistic curiosity, and I go down a rabbit hole and I find out all this backstory, and then I come back. And, this is what it says. Now I have something to say about it. And then the and so part. And I've kind of done that here to say that the DSM says this. I say, across a series of essays, this is what I say. And then the meaning-making side of it, right? And this is all kind of me doing what my brain automatically does as a Gestalt processor. I want to write the field guide. I don't know if it's called that yet. I don't know, what I will eventually call it. For me in my writings, titles come last. I think that when you have title, then you kind of foreclose direction. So I'd rather wander. I'd rather, see where the thought takes me. And then at the end, kind of look it over and say, okay, this is what I call it. But I've made a general outline. I've shared it with you. It's the main page linked off of the outside website as an outline. These are the things I think I'm going to cover. It's not a guarantee to say, it will cover this. It may be bigger, right? I've done that before in several times where I thought I was writing maybe 120 page book, and it turned out to be 450 pages after I was done. And then it goes to editor, and editor says, no, hack this, hack that, hack the other. So we'll see where this goes. But I'm very excited about it to dive in to that diagnostic space, right? To really kind of dive into that question of, autism, right? And the majority of the language-based part of the assessment and the criteria, I really do think they're describing gestalt processing. I really do. And so I tried to make the case for it. And we'll circle back next week. Perhaps Kathy and I will bring this up. In the UK, it's a holiday weekend, celebrating mothers on anniversaries and all of these kinds of things. And so she's off living a fabulous life, and I am here in the cold wilds of the mountains of California, chatting to you today. But I'm also testing out the new recording studio from Substack to see how it works. What can I do with it? So this is the first go of that. So this is not Sunday mornings with Kathy and Jamie. This is just me giving a wee preview, testing out some new tech. I'm hoping, from a solo recording standpoint, it's a lot easier to use than Camtasia, which is what I was using before. And if it is, I can cancel my subscription, which is great. Yeah, just checking in with you, thanking you for your continued support. And as always, I look forward to chatting to you soon. Bye-bye.